Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. I don't mean to disturb you. Hello, hello, hello. Madam, hello. How are you? I'm good. Yeah. No, don't keep quiet, but don't talk. Colleagues, all the speakers are here. Everyone is around. We are just going to wait for the next 2.5 minutes for the As I promised, 2.5, and you saw that everybody arrived, so that promise was kept. But there is another leg to the promise which has not yet been kept. We are still waiting for the Vice Chancellor, and we cannot do much because she has to do the opening. But I'm sure you are well aware that the schedule is very tight. I don't know who came up with the brilliant idea of allocating 2 hours. Because the last time I checked, the panelists that we have, each would need 3.5 hours. But somebody just decided that 2 hours will be enough. But just before the VC comes to familiarize yourself with how we are going to proceed, so that we don't have to repeat that. I think the VC will come and do the opening remarks. Then the proceedings will be moderated by our own Professor Toyin Falola, who will have a panel. And each panelist will have not more than 5 minutes to make a presentation. And then after that, there will be questions, because we didn't want this to be a place where there are presentations and then after that we go home. We need to engage. So as we know, the quality of the questions that we'll be asking will also determine the quality of our proceedings. So I'm sure we are ready with questions. If not, we should start crafting those questions that will be asked to the panelists, so that we have a very dynamic engagement. Otherwise, it will not be worth it. Given the quality of the panelists, I can assure you that any question should be asked, because the topic that we are dealing with, I think the issue of government of national unity has just captured the imagination of South Africans for some reason. But we should also note that government of national unity is an old tradition. If you look at the countries that have gone through this, and we also have countries that have had government of national unity 8 times, Israel, 8 times, Greece, 6 times, Portugal. So countries have gone through this process for a number of reasons. Some because they are in a war situation, and we have had cases, for instance, in Zimbabwe, in Kenya, in Rwanda, in Libya. They have had governments of national unity. So, but it has become important that we discuss this. This is our second in South Africa government of national unity. But this discussion today, it's not about South Africa. It's about Africa. Experiences of Africa with government of national unity. So those questions should not necessarily be confined to South Africa. What are experiences? How do we differ with the international experience in terms of government of national unity? Are they useful? What are the conditions that brings them down? Which ones have been successful? And so on, and so on, and so on. Those are issues that we will be engaging with. Prof, I don't know if you need to, yeah. as we are waiting, I'll call upon Prof. Paswa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Edith Paswa, and I'm the Acting Dean of the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. And I'm just going to be talking to you about the school and a brief history, those who don't know the school as well. The Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs was established as a magnet of academic excellence of the University of South Africa in 2020, and it was mandated to offer education that would bring meaningful change to the continent on matters of leadership, governance, and development. And this entails producing graduates who can respond to the ever-evolving challenges of the modern world in the 21st century. And this mandate that we have as a school is aptly captured in the vision of creating an African, global, and futuristic school of public and international affairs. And we are propelled by this quest to become a beacon and magnet of excellence in balancing theory and practice in knowledge production. And we use multidisciplinary approaches. This school is also driven by the goal and the mantra of developing and educating leaders who will solve complex problems in Africa and beyond. And I think many of us have seen this over the years with the work of what we used to call Timali. We are proud of our graduates, and we are proud of what we have produced over the years. And when we see our leaders, the leaders that we have produced taking platform on the continent also and here in the country, we are proud to have played this role in this regard. And these aspirations find resonance in the name of the school patron, Thabo Mbeki. And you know the attributes of this giant of a man that the school is named after, and his vision for South Africa and his values are underscored in what we do here in the school. The school wants to contribute to the renewal of Africa, which is one of his main mantra when he was president. He wanted to see the African Renaissance being realized in our lifetime. And we position ourselves as a school that will impact the world. We're taking Africa to the world. And as you will know, we have different agenda as Africa and Africans, which is not the same as other continents. We have our own socio-economic challenges. We have our own aspirations as a people. And therefore, this becomes very, very important in what we do at the school, as a school. So one of the things that the school is known for is to create dialogue, and also to be able to allow stakeholders, communities, because we are not just interested in academic impact, but we are also interested in the societal impact. And that's why we don't want to just produce people who can get A's and B's in their courses, but we want to create people who will be able to be influential in society, impact society in meaningful ways, and improve our society. That's why this interface with the public and the society becomes very, very important for us as a school. And today is one of those days as well, where we want to engage with scholars, with stakeholders, with the members of the public around issues that affect the continent and even here at home. So you would notice that unity amongst African states has been an elusive phenomenon throughout the years, from the establishment of Organization of African Unity, the OAU, to the establishment of the AU in 2002. And the lack of unity is even more apparent with countries in the Sahel region forming their own union, which appears to be a breakaway from the AU, or even protest, which suggests that the AU is not effective in meeting the needs of all its member states. So this lack of unity amongst Africans is further evident with African states. The lack of unity often has catastrophic consequences, as the inability to form governments of national unity or some kind of a coalition government result in conflicts which often deteriorates in civil wars as Africans are divided along political lines and at worst, ethnic lines. So South Africa has experienced a unique phenomenon where none of the political parties which contested the elections obtained an outright majority votes during national and provincial elections, which were held on 29 May 2024. So as a result, a government of national unity had to be formed with the exclusion of some political parties which could have destabilized the country. A few political parties could not be part of the government of national unity after protracted negotiations on the basis of disagreements and principles that they hold. So during these negotiations, South Africa was gripped by uncertainty, and the markets were also responding negatively, with the rand taking some strain. Political parties which did not become part of the GNU, however, agreed to be part of parliament, which was considered a positive move despite one party disputing the results. And these fragile situations which could have easily deteriorated into a conflict, or even worse, as we know what happens usually after elections in many of our countries here on the continent. It's usually deteriorate out to civil war or even instability within the countries. While South Africa has managed to manage this situation, it remains to be seen whether the newly formed government of national unity will be effective, last for 5 years, and become a blueprint for other African states. The success of this government of national unity is dependent upon the parties keeping their end of the bargain by, amongst others, agreeing of policy direction, governance, passing of legislation, and most importantly, fending off motions of no confidence, which may bring a fragile government of national unity to its knees, with undesirable consequences for South Africa. And I think these are the things that keeps us awake at night as South Africans, because we know we have had one government of national unity, which was successful, but we know it was during the transitions, so it was when South Africa really was transitioning and giving the world hope for a better future. So we did it, and now we are here again. So today, to discuss some of these pertinent issues relating to the government of national unity, coalitions, and minority governments, the TM School has assembled eminent African scholars to share their ideas on this important subject. And I'm not going to go into I'm not going to go into details trying to introduce them. There's someone who has been assigned to do this work of introduction, and you will get to know them. I think you have seen them on the poster, and therefore I wish to stop here as the Vice Chancellor has just arrived. Can we clap hands for the Vice Chancellor? Thank you. Over to you, Program Director.
Okay, the moment that we have been waiting for, I think we'll now call upon the Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of South Africa, Professor Puleng Lenkabule, to give opening remarks. And then immediately after that, because time is now very tight, we'll have Professor Falola to come. But let me say, my name is Tebo Holbaking. I'm your program director, as we have already dealt with a few matters. I would like to welcome the Vice Chancellor, also welcome the International Advisory Board of the TM School, welcome also the friends of the TM School. I see that Prof. Kamka is there, and few other colleagues, which is very important. Colleagues, without any waste of time, or the VP is also here, and she's pointing a finger at me. I suppose the mind has been squeezed, Prof. Motza. You are also welcome. Apologies for that. Yeah. Let's have the VC come and give opening remarks. Thank you, VC.
Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. Yes, I want to apologize that I had to go and get the vice principal to attend this. She's the one who's responsible for the Thabo Mbeki School, Professor Motsa Madikane. She's a professor of English, and therefore it was important that she forms part of this this process. She's the leader that the TM school reports to. Let me also apologize that we know that time is very, whilst also demonstrating our commitment to coming here. So I would, it would be remiss of me if I did not apologize to you for this. So I'd like to start by saying so. Professor Falola says many leaders in the continent start with apologies before they can deal with matters. In this period, I may not be a politician, but I thought it was the right thing to do, Prof, and I hope you understand. Let me take this opportunity, therefore, to acknowledge Professor Toyin Falola, the chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki the Thabo Mbeki School. He's a Jacob and Francis Sanger Mosika Chair in the Humanities at the University of Texas, Austin. Let me also recognize the presence of Professor Muna Ndulo, who is an internationally recognized scholar in various fields, and we are appreciative that you traveled well. We were awaiting your arrival yesterday early in the morning for the advisory team, and I'm happy that you have made it. Professor Cheryl Hendricks, the Executive Director of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, known to you for international relations work that she does, and of course, Dr. Stembi Lembete, the lecturer in political sciences at the University of Pretoria. Many youth and young adults follow her analysis of the political, economic, and other context in the transformation of our society. So welcome. It's quite gratifying to see you. And of course, our vice principal, management of the university here, the academicians, students, as well as the guests of the university who have been attracted by these intellectual towers that will be reflecting on important questions around the country, the world, the role of universities, but also the legacy of the leader, the patron, the chancellor, the former president of our university, who at the center of thinking around the role of Africa and its location in the global arena has been a source of our engagement through the TM School, the TM Foundation, and the university. So I'm pleased to welcome you to the roundtable hosted by the Thabo Mbeki School for Public and International Affairs. It is notable that 2 members of the International Advisory Panel are part of the speakers, and the chairperson of the IAC, Professor Toyin Falola, is a long-standing friend of the University of South Africa and has delivered the 12th annual Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture in 2022 here at UNISA. Professor Muna Ndulo is also a friend in the academy who is a former fellow leader at Codestria. So I'm quite appreciative. If you don't know Codestria, this is the fountain of knowledge that is unapologetically African, committed to projecting Africa's intellectual contributions to the global knowledge arena, and as well committed to creating knowledge wells for African scholars who want to ensure that their knowledge and their productivity transforms our society. The acting dean, Professor Paswana, and the team that is engaged in the preparations will attest to the fact that this particular roundtable looks into drawing also on the various partnerships that are important in pivoting the work that the University of South Africa has projected as important in its 151 years and in imagining its futures. And therefore, this idea of reclaiming Africa's intellectual futures cannot manifest if seminars, roundtables such as this are not organized for us as scholars, as leaders in the various environments do not have the time to engage, to deliberate, to ask the questions that are important for our societies, our continent, but also the global arena. In the next 2 weeks, the G20 will be meeting in Brazil. What do we as Africans bring to the G20? Would the multilateral engagements and commitment of the G20 be in alignment to the aspirations and dreams of Africans? What are the questions that the Thabo Mbeki School or the university can raise as part of the contributions in this knowledge arena? The same is true to the fact that there will be varied multilateral engagements in the country, in the continent, and everywhere else. And the question must be asked, how do we as scholars contribute to these engagements? Are we just in a gaze, or are we organically influencing the contributions of universities or of our knowledge arena into these questions? I'm very appreciative that the topic of today, do governments of national unity and coalitions work in Africa? We already know that the first government in the democratic era was a government of national unity. Have we interrogated its assets, its liabilities, and how it advanced the dividends that the democratic dispensation brought for us? Perhaps this is a question that the panel will help us to engage on. Our discussion takes place at an interesting time in the political system in South Africa, where for the first time since 1994, the ruling party, the African National Congress, a liberation movement that has agitated for the democratization system alongside with other liberation movements, did not win an outright majority of votes, 50%, during the national elections on 29 May 2024. While the ANC received the highest number of the national vote at 41%, this is far short of the 50% required to form the government by itself. The African National Congress had the option to form minority government, but chose to invite several political parties to form coalition government, dubbed as the Government of National Unity. Some may say technically it's not a coalition government. Some may say it is a coalition government. We will know from the panel what exactly is this that we are contending with. This nomenclature of the Government of National Unity is not new to the body politic of South Africa, as I've already said. It was first used in 1994 as part of the negotiated political settlement between the ANC and the former apartheid ruling political party, the National Party. From April 1994 to April 2024, the norm has been for the ANC to rule as a single majority political party. The GNU is, in essence, a government by coalition. While the South African GNU of 1994 included the ANC, the National Party, and Inkatha Freedom Party, the current GNU comprises about 10 political parties, some of whom received the lowest number of votes during the national elections. It also includes personalities that, in their social and moral or ethical imagination of society, bring varied questions that we must ask. Are these representatives embodying the aspirations of society, the quality leaders that we would like? And that is a question that I'm hopeful we will be discussing, the quality of leaders that have made it into this Government of National Unity, some from the small political parties, some from the large political parties. It is not the first time that the ANC rules by way of coalition in recent past. The previous local government elections saw the ANC losing power in some metropolitan municipalities, and therefore formed coalitions with other political parties in several metros. Several of these metros are still governed by way of coalitions have not had the requisite stability due to the continuous changes in the coalition partners, which resulted in the changes of mayors and members of the municipal councils. It must be clear here in Tshwane that we have been governed by a coalition government. We must also ask the question, if you have lived in Tshwane for over 15 years, whether the dividends have been manifest in the Government of National Unity or some coalition arrangements. You can charge by the potholes, by the infrastructure that is stolen, by the challenges of water and sewage, by the decline in the public systems, whether you think of the parks. These are the questions that we should be asking. Are we benefiting from these arrangements, or are they just expedient political arrangements that do not benefit society? That's not for me to answer. The panel will help us. Some countries in Europe have had longer histories of coalition governments, notably the Netherlands, which was last run by a single party in 1879. Italy has had multi-party rule since early 1940s. The federal electoral system in Germany usually use a system of coalition government, and this has been the case since 1961. The Organization of African Unity, OAU, was established on 25 May 1963 and transformed into the African Union in 2001. And the unity that OAU talked about was the unity of African states in rooting out colonial rule in the continent and to bringing about self-determination of the former colonial states. And therefore, we should be asking the question, if unity has been at the center of the continental imagination, are these coalition governments representing that, or are they representing something different? Is a government unique to South Africa on the African continent? The answer is no. Zimbabwe established GNU on 13 February 2009 when ZANU-PF formed a coalition with the MDC Morgan Tsvangirai as the Prime Minister and Thokozani Kupe, as well as Arthur Mutambara of MDC as Deputy Prime Ministers. ZANU-PF had the positions of president held by Robert Mugabe, who is also an alumnus of this university, the first vice president held by Joyce Mujuru, and John Ngomo as second vice president. The GNU in Zimbabwe lasted for 4 years. And then in Lesotho, the first 2 GNUs barely lasted for 2 years. The change in government in both Zimbabwe and Lesotho was accompanied by violence after the elections. These 2 examples alone raise the questions whether GNUs and the coalition governments work in the African context. What are the requisite conditions for them to work well? Perhaps the future will be better. Let me state that our Chancellor, His Excellency President Beki, has said, sometimes we think, and I shared this yesterday in the session that we had, to say, sometimes we think that today will forever be today, not remembering that today will be tomorrow, and tomorrow will be a different day. So it is my proposition that the panel will help us to make sense of our today, to learn from the past, to imagine the future that will be constructive for the emancipatory project. Some of the criticism against the GNU is that it has embedded elements that were never committed to Africa's liberation, the liberation of Africans who majority are on the underside of history or live with poverty. And perhaps the questions that we should be asking, how do we ensure that the emancipatory project is entailed in the plans, the budgets, and the processes of the GNU? Thank you very much. You're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. We have to go now. We are not the panel. Yeah. Thank you.
Colleagues, when I said the moment we have been waiting for has come, it was with anticipation, and the VC didn't disappoint. Let's give her a round of applause before she leaves. At this point, we are now transiting to another moment that we have been waiting for. And I will call upon Mr. David Letswalo to introduce the panelists, and immediately after that, Professor Toyin Falola, who will be moderating the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Program Director, Professor Lebakeng, for inviting me to the podium. Let me start off by paying my respects to the Vice Chancellor and Principal Professor Pulending Kabula, whilst extending my appreciation for her input this morning. Madam VC, whenever you take to the podium, we always expect substance, astuteness, insight, clarity, and thoroughness of articulation, and you consistently do not disappoint in that regard. We thank you. I would like to acknowledge our Vice Principal, Professor Motsa Madikani, and say that we appreciate your presence here this morning. Professor Paswana, the Dean in the TM School, I want to also thank you for giving us the exposition of the school, and also giving us some sort of background around this round table with the eloquence that you have actually displayed. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have been called to execute the difficult task of introducing the panelists for this round table, or this round table discussion on the government of national unity and coalitions in Africa. It is a very stimulating topic that is very much current. It's a topic that needs clear thinkers and highly knowledgeable speakers, particularly at university platforms such as we have this morning. It does not need chance takers. So I have precursorily having this rider to make. That is what I'm about to read about each of the panelists as a way of introducing them does not even attempt to scratch the surface of their profiles or their bios. Otherwise, if I were to do that, I would spend the whole day reading their bios, and the actual roundtable discussion would start tomorrow. So it is therefore safe to say that these are some of the highly accomplished scholars of our time in this, the 21st century. I will start with the first panelist in the name of Dr. Stembile Mbete. She is, as the VC has indicated, a political scientist with over 15 years of experience working in academia, civil society, and government. She has a PhD in international relations from the University of Pretoria, where she is a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences. She joined the University of Pretoria from the Presidency of South Africa, where she was a researcher in the Secretariat of the National Planning Commission, contributing to the drafting of the National Development Plan in the areas of public service reform, anti-corruption policy, and community safety. In 2021, she served as a member of the Ministerial Committee on the Electoral System. You can see the connections now. Stembile has consulted on political risk for several domestic and international organizations in the public and private sectors. She comments frequently on a range of political issues in South African international media. From 2021 to 2023, Stembile was seconded to FutureLect, a non-profit and non-partisan political training program for emerging public leaders in Africa, where she worked as director of programs. In 2021, she served as a member of the Ministerial Committee on the Electoral System. Get the connection again? She served on the Council of the Private Security Industry Regulation Authority from 2021 to 2023. So I'll move on to the next panelist, and that is Professor Muna Ndulu, who is a William Nelson Cromwell Professor of International and Comparative Law at Cornell Law School. He is also the Elizabeth and Arthur Ray Director, Leo and Avil Becker International Legal Studies Program in the Council of in the Cornell Law School. He is Honorary Professor of Law, the Faculty of Law at UCT, and is also an Extraordinary Professor of Law in the University of Free State. Additionally, he is also an Honorary Professor of the University of the Western Cape. He is a former Professor of Law and Dean of School of Law, the University of Zambia. From 1986 to 1995, it's not too long ago, right? He served as legal officer in the International Trade Law Branch of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law. He has carried out several UN assignments, including serving as Chief Political and Legal Advisor with the United Nations Mission, Observer Mission in South Africa, and also as a Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General to South Africa in the years 1992 to 1994, just recently. He was also a legal officer for Kosovo in the year 2000, Afghanistan 2003, and East Timor in 1999. He was a consultant to the constitution-making body in Kenya and also Somalia and Zimbabwe. Professor Ndulo has published 23 books and over 120 articles in academic journals, and has served as arbitrator on cases of the International Criminal Court and the ICSID. He is the recipient of several academic awards. I'm not going to mention them, otherwise we're not going to even start this discussion. That is Professor Muna Ndulo. We have the third panelist who is online, and that is Professor Cheryl Hendricks. She is the executive director of the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation. Prior to this, she was the executive head of the Africa Institute of South Africa in the HSRC, that is the Human Science Research Council. From July 2018 to September 2021, she was appointed as professor in the Department of Politics and International Studies at the University of Johannesburg in April 2013. And she also served as a head of department from 2014 to 2017. Professor Hendricks also spent many years working at the Institute for Security Studies, ISS, first as the program head of for the Southern Africa Human Security Program, and then as senior research fellow in the Conflict Management and Peacebuilding Division of that organization. She has also worked at the Center for Conflict Resolution and also at the UWC. She holds a doctorate in government and international relations from the University of South Carolina, and also a master's in Southern African Studies from the University of York in the UK. She has a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the areas of conflict management, that is conflict prevention, peacemaking, peacekeeping, post-conflict reconstruction and peace building, women and peace and security, African regional security architectures, and so on and so on. She has published widely on these topics and engages a range of policymakers, academic researchers, and civil society on these matters. Ladies and gentlemen, all these panelists will be spearheaded in a way by none other than Professor Toyin Falola, who will be the moderator of this very session. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to say that Professor Falola is one of those eminent scholars who is difficult to introduce. Just by way of emphasis, he is an accomplished and extraordinary scholar. And the best way to introduce such esteemed intellectuals such as him is simply not to introduce them. And the safest way to tell the stories of such people is simply not to tell them. However, for Professor Falola, the smartest way to introduce him to the world is to simply say, Google Falola. For present purposes, I will venture to say, and with emphasis, that Professor Toyin Falola is the chairperson of the International Advisory Board of the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. He's a professor of history and also he's a professor of history, University Distinguished Teaching Professor, and the Jacob and Sangam Mosika Chair in the Humanities at the University of Texas at Austin. He's an extraordinary professor of politics at the University of Pretoria, extraordinary professor of human rights at the University of Free State. He's a professor of African Studies at the University of Cape Town, and also professor emeritus in humanities at Leeds University. He had served as the Klug Chair of the South Library of Congress, the president of the African Studies Association, and vice president of the Slave Route Project. It's a UNESCO project, that is. He has received over 30 lifetime career awards. And in addition to this, please listen carefully, he has received 20 honorary doctorates. So his recent books include Memories of Africa, Home and Abroad in the United States, and also the one on African memoirs and cultural representations. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, this is nothing, it's just scratching the surface of these eminent people's bios. At this point, I'm going to ask Professor Falola as the moderator to take us through. Professor Falola, we are in your hands. Thank you.
The address is on the envelope is longer than the letter. You know, goats were fighting in the forest. It was a very big fight. And Fox suggested, why can't we form a government to resolve this fight? All right. And then they appointed as chair the lion. So, when the goats saw the venue, they refused to attend the meeting because they know they will be roasted for lunch and dinner at the same time. And in facing Mount Kenya, President Jomo Kenyatta came up with an allegory. And I will add a little bit of embellishment. So the animals were wondering, why were they living, exposing themselves to rain, to sun, to mosquito bites? And they decided, okay, let's behave like human beings and build our own houses. Yes. Fox built this house, and like you and me, he called for a housewarming party, which we all do, forgetting that the mortgage is still unpaid, right? And when the party was over, Lion said, before the count of 3, Fox, I want you to leave this house, the house that he has built. 1, 2, he ran away. And that was the end of his investment. Well, he summoned courage again and said, okay, I will build another house. When the party was over, Ayena said, before the count of 3, I want you to leave. He lost his house. Then he built the biggest house, which can take an elephant. And he called another party. Unknown to them, he has set up a system that will burn down the house. So they were all in, and he took an excuse, and he set the entire house on fire. The tiger died, the lion died, the hyena died. And President Jomo Kenyatta converted the allegory that if there is no justice, there's not going to be peace. So on the one hand, this topic is about ordering societies and ordering them well. But from many previous cases, it's an attempt to manage very, very difficult situations. And part of this presentation, as we go along, we touch upon factionalism, because if there's no factionalism, you don't need a unity government. We'll talk about plural societies. I will return to that, because all plural societies, by their nature, are problematic. That's what they do in the entire Department of Political Science. You're just talking about plural societies in their various forms. And then we talk about divided governments, which is a preface to civil war in many contexts. About coalition, power sharing. Power sharing is connected with corruption. Because the very basis of sharing power in many situations is to allocate authority and resources to yourself. And I will talk about the South African situation, the current one, and consequences. I want to thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity. I'm in the same department with my colleague. We're in the same board together, and I know them for their distinguished accomplishments. And this all, where we are today, has a special meaning to me, a very special meaning, because I've been privileged to hold conversations in this hall. The paper that I wrote, Ritual Archives, first presented in this hall, has been translated into 13 languages. And I presented in this hall what has become a document to end SARS to those who protest in Kenya. I call it protestography. And it is this very hall that I recommended that we should be teaching what I frame as protestography. How do you mobilize and protest without destroying things that are of values to you? They can't hear me at the back? Why didn't you complain much earlier? My best points. I've made my best points. Sorry about that. Oh, next time complain. Should I start all over? So, and we held an African Day here before in this hall, and I was privileged to participate. With due respect to my colleagues, I will limit my own contributions to 3 areas. The first is what usually becomes an outcome. How do you resolve a process of factionalism? And I will close by talking about the current South Africa relations and what is going on today. There's always ideas that instigate the creation of a national government. And bear in mind, if you study constitutions, constitutions are always product of conflicts and wars. So if you see American Constitution, after the American Civil War, you renegotiate. If you look at the South African Constitution, the context of apartheid, so that you are trying to see how you can manage serious problems via the agency of a constitution. And in trying to manage these things, we are dealing with pluralism, that you have many ethnic groups, religious identities. We don't even look alike. You have to deal even with color differences, racial differences, gender differences. So plural societies are very difficult to manage because they manifest every day both centripetal and centrifugal forces. The forces that unite them and the forces that divide them. That is on a daily level. Second, dual societies. Rwanda, where our friend won 98.5% of the vote. You know that is not possible. You know, even if you go to heaven, you know it's not possible to win 28.5%. Satans live there. Angels live there. Good Christians like me will go to heaven. Bad Christians like some of you will go to hell. So how can I win 98.5%? But dual societies, there is no theoretician that has given us any document to manage a dual society. I'm Hutu, you are Tutsi. Am I not going to vote for the Hutu? If you are Tutsi, are you not going to vote for a Tutsi candidate? So by its very nature, dual societies are complicated. And now the Western device of democracy is by itself very flawed. Why Africans have bought into the Western conception, I do not understand. By its very nature, democracy is very messy. Contrary to what you read in books, that it unites you, it actually does the opposite. Democracy revives religious identities. It revives gender identities. It revives religious identities. It revives everything that will divide you. That's what it does. See the forthcoming American presidential election. That democracy will bring out the worst in society. Racism, immigration, access to resources. It's just going to bring out, as this election unfolds, you will see how what they call democracy actually produces what will create a war. America, the US that many of you celebrate, the reason why it doesn't have civil war issues is that the boundaries of states, California, Texas, are not coterminous with the boundaries of ethnicities. You understand? If, for instance, Texas is just Hispanic only, Louisiana is just black only, California is just white only, they will behave exactly like Nigeria and Chad. You understand? And when you now bring this democracy to us without interrogating it, it's going to bring the worst in us as well. The last Nigerian election, are you Igbo? Are you Yoruba? Are you Fulani? Are you Hausa? Those are the fundamental premises. And you find how this democracy itself has produced political factionalism in this great country. You have ideological differences, different ideological beliefs. You are a Marxist, you are a capitalist. This is your ideology. That is ideology you are going to fight. Because ideologies by their nature produce that fight. As in my first allegory, between the goats and the lions, they cannot be together. One is a vegetarian, right? And the other eats only flesh. Then you have policy agendas. At any level, family, local, national, international, policy agendas are never going to be the same. So your wife wants to drive a nice car, Mercedes-Benz, right? That is going to generate a fight if you want a Camry. There's just nothing you can do about that. Policy agendas always create problems. Leadership and personalities are very, very complicated because by their very nature, politicians are the grandmasters of deceit. There is no honest politician anywhere in the world. You understand? None. It's a business of betrayal. It's a business. It's not a, it's not like a professor in the classroom. Of course, professors are also politicians. That's why departments don't run well. So, and the process of producing that leadership is very complicated. Impact of governance. So, whether it's South Africa or Nigeria or the US, leadership is connected to interest, to the factions you want to improve, to the money you want to steal. Because you can never tell a politician not to steal money. If he doesn't steal money, he's not going to get to heaven. That is their own business. And you are in this situation. And the theories of factionalism is that it produces internal conflicts while it promises to resolve conflicts. You understand? It's a mechanism to resolve conflict, but it generates its own conflicts. As you have to challenge one another. 2 days ago, I was listening to Parliament. I was fascinated by what they're talking about. One parliamentarian wants the police to expand. Another wants the army to expand. Another for mine workers. Another for school system. They're just talking. Nothing is going to happen. It's very entertaining, but if you think that budget is going to change, you're just deceiving yourself. Because if you say, I want the police to expand, then they will ask you, where should we take the money from? Because they cannot hide money. They cannot spend what they don't have. Then they will say, okay, UNICEF, I just passed through the place. They are doing a new building. Cut the UNICEF budget. Because you have to cut something to expand something. Unless you want to go and print money. Then you are going to fight over alliances. You can't overcome that. And you fight over personality issues, and you fight other things. How do these things now apply to this great country? They've released a document, which is on the internet, what they mean, how to dissolve it. It's very brilliant if you read it. And the English is very nice. They talk about the modalities of the government of national unity, and they publicize this. Let me make 5 points each on 3 aspects. That there's an historical context for this government of national unity. Because after it emerged from decades of struggle against apartheid, the Mandela government was formed that way. Second, there have been leadership battles. Within 24 hours, some months ago, Ramon Passi, the president, was even about to resign. Zuma left. President Mbeki did not complete his term. So that leadership battles will never end. If you are looking for an end to leadership battle, you are saying that human beings must not have ambitions. And you are not going to have a collection of human beings without ambitions. All of us in this room have ambitions. They may even be noble, as that of my mother, that my mother's ambition was to make the children successful. But it was even very difficult. Very noble, but very difficult. And you are going to have policy disputes. That's point number 5. How can we all sit in this room and not have policy disputes? It's not possible. I'm a professor. I want all money to go to education. But that's my own preference. But you're a businessman. You query the value of education. You will say, all these historians that you have been producing, what are they used for? Why can't we establish another brewery so that people will drink more beer? That's a policy. And I cannot stop you from having those policies and having those ambitions, but they will generate crisis. And we are divided by religion. We are divided by race. We are divided by ethnicity. We have to fight because policies are connected to those divisions. They're connected to those divisions. And the way we evaluate the impact of governance is also based on self-interest. If you have been privileged to steal $20 million from the government, it's a good government. If you fix bad roads, it's a good government. The cracks on the roads, the potholes. I know a person who became a millionaire on potholes. During the night, he and his boys would go and create potholes. And to those who give him contract, that's a good government. A government that makes you a millionaire fixing potholes, that is the government to cherish. And as we map out all these differences, our interests are different. What are the current challenges that this government of national unity is going to have? Economic inequality is there. It is not an arrangement that will solve this economic inequality. If you know how a government of national unity can solve economic inequality, they should actually pay you. Second, it is not going to eliminate corruption. It can reduce the amount that comes to your pocket, because if you do not spread corruption to the parties in coalition and to the leadership of that coalition, it's going to collapse. You have to give the Zuma party something. You have to give the ANC something. You have to give the other small parties something. How you do that is part of how you stabilize the government and manage it. Then you have issues around social cohesion. And that social cohesion will merge with issues around social delivery. Somebody is coming with a note. You don't have to come with a note. Let me close. Don't worry, I will close. And it's not going to solve issues of crime and violence. But there are opportunities. The demographic dividend will continue. The natural resources are not just going to disappear. Elements of democratic institutions are not going to disappear. So how do we move forward? The government must embark on economic reform. They must do anti-corruption efforts. At least they must create a perception to their citizens that they are not corrupt. That is difficult. And they must do social investment in education and healthcare, safety and security. And they must do everything to produce political stability. Otherwise, the country can move in the direction of crisis. So the future of this great country lies in how the collective efforts of governments are managed, how you balance the interest of power with that of civil society, how you let private sector be functional without being corrupt, and how citizens must believe that their social contracts have not been violated. I've spoken for too long, but there was nobody to monitor the moderator. Thank you. Oh, can we, Professor Hendricks? Yeah. Can we bring her online? I give you 2 minutes.
She's there already. You can just invite her.
I've already invited her.
Maybe she doesn't hear because of the mic.
She's on Zoom.
Where's the mic? Cheryl? Cheryl? Hi, Cheryl. Can I also get the moving mic, please? Okay. Oh, she's here?
Hi.
She's here.
Hi.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Over to you.
Are you saying that I should go next?
Yes. Yes. 5 minutes.
I'm here. Thank you very much. There doesn't seem to be very much to say after that very eloquent two introductions by the VC and by Prof. Lola. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Are you able to hear me?
You asked whether we want breakfast, right? Did you ask whether we need breakfast?
She hears this one. Cheryl, would you hear me? Can you hear Prof.
There
Lola?
seems to be a lag, an echo, so everything that I say is playing back to me like 2 minutes later. Anyway, I was asked to focus on South Africa, so this is what I will do. I can hear you, but there's a...
So can we call her while we fix the problem? She's been sitting for 2 years.
Hello? Cheryl?
We have a challenge here. I'm going to try and manage this. For me, I think in relation to the Government of National Unity now, Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, continue. Can you show her in the chat that we can hear her, please?
Everything that I say is playing back to me 2 minutes later.
Okay, switch yourself off, Cheryl. Maybe switch one of your devices off.
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple of things here. While we're back after 30 years of democracy at the Government of National Unity,
Cheryl, while they sort you out, can we go to, can we give the other panelists while they sort your glitches? Can you hear me? I'm hoping she's not presenting. Yes,
yeah, please do, because everything that I say plays back to me loudly as if I'm sitting with you.
Okay, all right. Perhaps maybe switch this mic and let's use this one. You want to come here?
I don't mind.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it is now afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to stand on existing protocols. Prof, indulge me. I'm going to speak for 2.5 minutes, ne? After being told that I have 2 minutes. I was asked to speak on this topic from the perspective of South Africa about whether or not this Government of National Unity, which really is a type of coalition, right? You've got different kinds of coalition that can be formed after an election that results in a hung legislature, like we had with our national parliament, and a Government of National Unity is one of several types of coalition that can be established in that kind of situation for a number of reasons, many of which we heard earlier, in post-conflict situations, after some kind of peace negotiations, which is what we had here in South Africa in 1994, And in Zimbabwe, for example, after their elections, the formation of a government of national unity is often one that is done to mitigate conflict, to mitigate divisions within a particular society after an election, and to include as many parties, as many actors as possible into the governance of that country to prevent the kind of conflict and division that would prevent or that would make government very, very difficult. In our case, in the South African case, and there's three things that I basically want to speak about. The first is why it is we have the situation that we are in now, of having had no single party get over 50% in the National Assembly, then creating the requirement for a coalition government to be formed at national level and in two of our provinces. And then I'm going to speak around the challenges that we have faced with coalition government, particularly at local government level. And then the third is then what lessons we can take from that to ensure future stability of the current arrangement. On the first point, I think it's very important to set out that our electoral system and the electoral system as stipulated in the Constitution, the requirements within the Constitution, that any election at local, at provincial, or at national level must result, in general, in proportional representation. That's a constitutional requirement. Constitutions can be changed, but currently that is the constitutional requirement. And so the electoral systems that we have at local, at provincial, and for national are proportional representation electoral systems, whether they are what we have at local government level, which is a mixed member proportional system where half of the seats in a council come from first past the post direct election and the other half come from closed list PR, or whether they are what we have at national and provincial, which is a closed list PR system this year with a little bit of a remix to allow individuals to contest for election. But ultimately, the systems of election that we have are PR systems. And because of that, our electoral systems are designed to result eventually in power sharing. PR systems everywhere in the world lead to an outcome where no party gets over 50%. The two exceptions to that currently, well, now we're no longer part of the exception, but the two exceptions to that over the last 30 years had been South Africa and Namibia. And so in many ways, the situation that we have seen in local government since 2016, but actually we've had coalition governments at local government level since the local government system was established in 2000. But the situation that we've seen at local government and now what we've seen in certain provinces and at national is a normalizing of our system. The system is now behaving in the way it was designed to operate. The outcomes we have seen are the way the system was designed to function. And I think that's a very important first principle to grapple with when we talk about the success or not of coalitions. Is it good for the country? Is it bad for the country? It almost doesn't matter, because that's the way that things are designed to end up. So we need to make it good somehow. It needs to start being good for the country quickly. Or we need to make the constitutional changes that are required to create different kinds of electoral outcomes. The reason why our system didn't work in the way that it was designed from 1994 until the present was because of the hegemonic position of the ANC. The ANC was a hegemonic power and party that was a broad church that commanded the support and the that commanded the support, but also they had a mass-based legitimacy from the support of the majority of the population, of the electoral population. That is no longer the case. The ANC's hegemony has been in decline since 2004-ish. Well, since 2004 was the pinnacle of that, and then it's been declining since the 2009 election. And in many ways, what we are living with now is a product of that decline. Because what's happened is that what PR systems do is that they fracture party systems. PR electoral systems, and in our case, one where we've got the purest form of PR system. And what it does is that it encourages political support to fracture. It encourages a proliferation of parties to be started. It's very easy to start a party in this country. And so for every issue, as the Prof said earlier, it creates then all sorts of parties based on sectarian division, whether that's ethnic, whether that's religious, whether that's racial. And that is what we are seeing currently. So we've gone from having 14 parties represented in the National Assembly to having 18. And 10 of those are within the national coalition, which we are calling a government of national unity, because the party that won the most number of votes, which is the ANC with its 40%, invited all 18 parties to join it in a governing coalition. So that's the first thing, just to say that wishful thinking doesn't serve any of us. The reality of the system that we have is that this is the outcome it leads to. The question now is, what do we do with those outcomes? And that leads me to my second point about the problems of coalitions that we've seen at local level. And what we've seen is, and I'm going to sort of bundle them up, firstly is that once the PR system starts creating these kinds of fractured outcomes, it doesn't stop creating them. So if you look at all 9 provinces, from 2016 to the 2021 local government elections, Eastern Cape went from having 1 hung municipality to 3. The Free State went from 1 to 4. Gauteng went from 4 to 8 hung municipalities. KZN went from 7 to 21. Limpopo stayed stable at 2. Mpumalanga went from 0 to 3. Northern Cape from 3 to 10. Northwest from 1 to 3. The Western Cape from 8 to 16. So this also is not reversible. Big problems that we faced a coalition is firstly the lack of coalition agreements. And that is one thing that I think has been encouraging about this statement of intent that Prof spoke about, that at least we know the basis on which the negotiation has happened. What needs to now be fleshed out is a program that's made public of, well, these are the things that we are committing to do as a coalition. We haven't seen that in most of our local government coalitions, which is why they can chop and change and collapse at will. The second thing is that what we've seen is motions of no confidence being used and abused at local level, and that still remains a big threat at national level. The third thing, we've seen these small parties, lots of these 1- and 2-seat parties, who become the coalition operators. Everything lives or dies on them, and that isn't great for stability. And then the last thing that we've seen has been, there's many things, but the last thing I'll mention here is that what we've seen is that party realignment, so internal party realignments within parties, then are externalized according to which coalition is, so depending on which faction of a party is in charge at any given point, that then affects which coalition arrangements they decide to go into, which is why you've got councils collapsing and then needing to be formed again. So my final thing, just to end on 3 thoughts around things that will ensure, no, nothing will ensure stability, but 3 things to think about as we are concerned around the coalition at national level and the government of national unity. The first one, I think, is around transparency of the agreement. So we had the statement of intent made public, but all other agreements around what policy is going to be focused on, what will be implemented, what's the work program, what are the agreements of all of the different ministers from the different parties, that needs to be public, and civil society needs to agitate for that, because that is what we will then be able to use to hold them accountable. The second thing is that we need a change and a transformation of our political culture, and cultural change takes time. But where the politicians understand that they're not now governing in a majoritarian system, but also that we as people, as citizens, as voters also understand and moderate our expectations of the politicians that we've elected to fit the system that we have. And then the final thing, and what I will be watching out for, is the very important role that Parliament is going to need to play. We've got a parliamentary system, we don't have a presidential one. And so what kind of role Parliament is going to play in holding this coalition agreement, or this government of national unity, accountable and actually reflecting and representing the voices of the people. Thank you.
You know, professor tortures students. After teaching them, they now say they should do exams. So I want to torture our professor now by complicating our conversation and asking questions. So I really love where the springboard on the constitutions. And the outcome, as she argues, that we produce cleavages, competitions, and the point she made that what the Constitution, that by reading the Constitution, it may produce a divided government. Let me add points to that. All great constitutions, and South Africa is one of the best constitutions in the world. One of the longest and one of the best. You may not think so, but I'm telling you. But no constitution deals with values. They don't deal with values. You understand? You can't write into a constitution that Professor Falola should not steal the money of UNISA. That's the value, you understand? And they don't deal with many normative issues. And finally, they don't deal with conventions. Conventions are tied to culture. When you produce Zuma, he was reading the Constitution as he was a king of the Zulu. The king is different from the president in a democracy. So, but he was also reading it in terms of saying, and Trump did the same thing for the American population. Now, what are you talking about, Constitution? You understand? You know, if you're a Christian, they told you about the 10th commandment. But there's an 11th commandment. My wish is final. It overrides all the 10 previous ones. And the other one, and I will invite the professor back to answer the question before I call on our next speaker. When you have a situation like this, you are faced with many issues. One is the way countries in the Sahel, country in Nigeria dealt with this. Military coup. You can overthrow a government and say, I don't want to share power. After the First Republic, democracy collapsed in Nigeria till 1999. Or in the Sahel, you follow the politics in Niger. There was an election, and it's a coup now. There was a coup. So because there are other possibilities which may make this national government one of the best outcomes. Because the army can overthrow the government, irrespective of what is said in the Constitution. So, if we throw the APC into it, and I will use my father to illustrate the APC. My father is the best example. He married 4 women, and my wife was the youngest. You understand? When I was 5 months old, my father died. May his soul rest in peace. And then they threw away my mother outside of the house. And because in the patriarchal system, it's the father's side that has the child. Complications. In those complications, you can have a country that behaves like a polygamy. You understand? How do you manage 4 wives? You say only a wicked man can marry 4 wives. You understand? Because a nice man cannot have 4 wives. You have to be ruthless, born by God to be very wicked, because you are managing a series of problems on a daily basis. And then, that is not enough. You enlarge your scale through side chicks. Yes, because a person who marries 4 wives is going to marry another number 5. You don't know that. That is what they do. Yes, that's what they do. And then they enscale this crisis. It's enscaled. Because 2 days in a week, you don't see him. Where are you? I'm managing my business in Johannesburg. It's not in Johannesburg. Political parties also behave that way in terms of a polygamous arrangement. Let me spell it out for you. So, within the ANC, factions emerge. You're a socialist. You're a Marxist. He's been putting their documents together. That's Professor Sifiso. He's a preeminent author on this road to democracy. And he just published the letters of Mbeki. It's ready. Now, let me quickly finish. So, in doing that, many of you confuse liberationist movements with parties in power. They are not the same. Liberationist movements have a terminal point that is going to end and transit to the stability of management. And that stability of that management will do 2 things. It will turn the nationalism that produced liberationist movement, right, into a negative nationalism that will be into managing a state. So when you have a liberationist movement, it runs on the principle that there's an enemy to fight. You understand? Yes. All liberationist movements coalesce around an enemy. Once you transit and that liberationist movements come to an end, the nationalism will turn inside. And in creating a new set of enemies, it is among yourself. Thank you. Let's invite Professor Hendricks. I'm going to disappoint you shortly, so don't clap until the end. You can answer. No, I think do you want her to answer, Professor Hendricks? Yeah, they were saying she's ready. Okay.
I hope that this is better now. Prof, I'm not going to switch on my camera, so I hope that this will be better. Can you hear me now? I'm just going to go ahead. I hear myself. The echo is very bad here, but I'm just going to go ahead. I thought I would take the tack of looking at, while we're back here after 30 years of democracy, how similar or different is it to our first GNU? Why did the first one fail? What is needed to make this one succeed? I'm going to venture to say that the context is different, the actors are different, and the settlement, even though it's called the same, is actually different. And the outcome we actually don't know. So, as we all know, a government of national unity is a political settlement between elites to gain or retain power. There are mechanisms for managing political crises or conflicts, usually by bringing opposing parties together to form an inclusive government, and more to bring those parties who cause the most harm in our societies, because they are usually post-conflict settlements, to the table to share power. We have seen many of these forms of government emerge in Africa since the 1970s. We had Ghana in 1977, we had Zimbabwe, the Lancaster House Agreement in 1979, and then from the 1990s, this form of power sharing became a very common strategy for conflict resolution. Padu and Van der Gister crafted a topology of GNUs. Number one, those formed out of protracted violent conflict, which was our first GNU. Those formed out of more short-term conflicts. Those formed out of coups. Those formed after electoral disputes. And those formed to manage other types of political or constitutional crisis, which I think is our current context here. I note too that the African Union has no policy framework for government of national unities, even though it's often the outcome of the mediated processes. So South Africa's first government of national unity in 1994 was because of a mutually hurting stalemate. We remember that language, negotiated settlement. There were particular frameworks for engagement, the record of understanding, the interim constitution, which outlined how parties will share power, the number of votes determining the number of cabinet position seats. It was certainly influenced by the need for reconciliation and trust and confidence building. Recall that whites wanted assurance that the majority rule will not mean domination, and that there was a perceived need then to work together to develop South Africa. So power sharing in this context was essentially ushered in to prevent a counter-revolution and to achieve growth and stability. There were only three parties then, the ANC, the National Party, and Inkatha. And we know the political formula then. If you won at least 80 seats, you can get a deputy president. If you won more than 20 seats, you could get a ministerial position. So the GNU then was crucial to a peaceful transition to a democratic South Africa. Parties knew going into the elections what they could expect. So did we as the electorate. We knew it would be a power sharing 2 years, 1994 to 1996. And I think also important to note at that GNU is that we had consummate peacemakers at the helm. Mandela, but also Jakes Gerwel was there, really managing the tensions at the union building. However, that GNU still dissolved. The National Party was both in government and an opposition party at the same time, and it found that dual role very difficult to manage. It became co-implementer, co-responsible for the policies, but it disagreed with those policies. The National Party also worried about the upcoming elections for 99 at that time, and they were losing power to the Democratic Party, which then began to capture that white base. So came the 99 elections. Then the ANC got a landslide victory, 66% of the vote. And we saw the beginning of our one-party dominant system. And the Democratic Party became the official opposition of the time. So the question then was, for the first GNU, did that work? I think that it certainly enabled us to shift towards a peaceful transition, a new democratic dispensation, founded on a new constitution. It also, importantly, enabled the ANC to consolidate its power and to implement its policies. And we know too that the National Party was obliterated. There will be winners and there will be losers in any government of national unity. We are also struggling with the same issues of poverty, unemployment, and crime, which were the issues used to argue for a government of national unity at the time. If we move to our current context here, I think we're in number 5 of our topology. The ANC dropped to 40% of the vote, a vote in which we only had 58% of those eligible to vote actually voting. So this government of national unity is formed because of a weakened ANC, weakened because of factionalism and weakened because of a lack of support. However, the ANC remains in charge in this government of national unity. The discourse that it presents to us is that it's a directive from the people, based on the will of the people. It's a victory for democracy, we are told. But it's more likely that the votes display the disaffection, the frustration, and the lack of trust in our political parties. The ANC trust levels have been steadily declining. The DA's trust levels have remained stagnant. We now have 11 political parties in a GNU, not based on the number of votes, so not based actually on the political will, on the will of the people. And it actually excludes some of the majority parties, those who came in 3rd and 4th, whether they self-excluded or not. The result, I think, is the same. Importantly, too, I think the framework of arrangement seems to be rather vague here, a statement of intent. The name itself, for me, very worrying. We all know the saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and intentions are not binding. So this is a voluntary agreement, a minimum set of priorities that they had to agree on. And the devil is always in the detail. How do we resolve our vexed challenges? And already we see then the disagreements emerging here. So now we have a cabinet announced by the ANC, remember, with 40% of the vote, but who got 62% of the ministerial positions. So really did not lose very much here. I do want to note that women who constituted the majority of the electorate lost the most with this government of national unity. We dropped from 50% of cabinet positions to 40%, and 46% of members of parliament to 43%. Youth gained, and we now have the youngest cabinet with an average age of 54, I think it is. So I think that this sharing of power is premised on political party interests and comes at the expense and exclusion of hard-won rights of women who effectively voted these parties into authority. And this is problematic. So will this government of national unity work? It's very difficult to counter arguments for inclusivity, for working together for the greater good, etc. Who can argue against this? But is this truly what we are working for? If it is, we must put our wisdom and our resources together. But I think that this one is more one of political expediency at the moment. I do, however, think that the sustainability of the government of national unity would have been stronger if it materialized post a national dialogue, so that there is broad agreement of those taking co-responsibility for implementation. And because I think it's in the implementation where the differences are going to emerge, and parties, once they begin to disagree, they will pull out. Governments of national unity are usually uncomfortable and need compromises because they bring together opposing parties. Here we have a government of national unity which is relatively exclusive of those who obtained a large percentage of the vote. These parties are still in parliament, so we have to brace ourselves. It will be disruptive. I'm alarmed at the language. It's polarizing, it's dichotomous. So now the latest I saw was we have builders and breakers in our government. Can we truly say that we have a government of national unity when there's a profound disunity between the 70% in the government of national unity and the 30% outside of it? For me, the big question is, can these parties move beyond their party interest for the greater good of the country? And who will define what that greater good is? Will the shift towards a government of national unity heal the divisions in the ANC? Or will it become even more fractious as compromises inevitably have to be made? Will it rebuild the ANC, or will the ANC have the same fate as that of the National Party? South Africa has deep structural challenges. Changes in political heads may be necessary, but it is not sufficient for the kind of nation building and restructuring that needs to take place. The national dialogue is not an option for the government of national unity. It is a must if we're to gain a consensus on how we move forward. What is the criteria for success? It's not how long the government of national unity will last. Will it last 5 years or not? These are by their very nature temporary. It is whether or not stated objectives would have been achieved. Here, the stated intent is to create a more just and equitable society by tackling our economic and social ills. And it's obviously too early to tell if we will succeed this time around. But we know the pitfalls, and we also know the consequences if we don't hold this together, which is violence. So I think we need to be mature, and we need to tackle our vexed challenges innovatively and squarely and collectively. And that collectively, I think, includes listening to all voices, especially those who differ from us, for therein lies the growth, the innovation, and the maturity. I think I still have some great faith as I close in our collective will, and we can call this government what we want to, a government of national unity, a coalition, elite pacting, as long as it takes us to where we want to be. Peaceful, developed, and prosperous South Africa in which we all live with human dignity. And this we get through a negotiated national dialogue. I think it's important, in my last sentence, that we discuss a social contract. So I'm very pleased, Prof. Lola, that we do open up our discussion around democracy and democratization, because we do have to rethink how we want to coexist in our polities in Africa and how we want to be represented. That is the key question for all of us on this continent going forward. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cherry Hendricks. You and Professor Mbete have created consensus around ANC and some of its consequences. And in some ways, you've also created a consensus on dialogue. Let me reflect on our contributions and convert some of them into theoretical platforms. My point number one is, anytime you centralize power in any political party or any government, in most cases, it generates a crisis. That is just fundamental. Even in running a family, at the very level of domestic units, when the man in patriarchal institutions centralizes power, his wife is angry every day. Because in that centralization of power, your wife does not know how much money you have. And if she does not know how much money you have, she'll be making demands on a daily basis that are not necessarily connected to your wallet. And when you don't meet that demand, each time you go out, she makes up a reason and centralizes that reason that you are dividing your wallet between her and another woman. And that domestic operation is also how government functions. whether it's in Nigeria or Ghana, in which you centralize power. Everybody has to come to you. You build roads for me, build electricity for me, build water for me. That's what they're going to do. What else do you want them to do? Because it's you who centralize that power, and it is you they must come to. Second, if you watch ANC very well, under what the professor called hegemonic power, what happens theoretically is that it has limited capacity to punish its own members. Because that's where the focus is not going to be. The focus will be on the capacity to reward. You understand? And when you, all reward systems, whether it's UNISA or IBM or the nation, is ultimately connected to corruption. That is just the way it is. If you want to do well in a department, work under a pet theory. Whenever your head of department asks you to do something, do it. And in that pet theory, you will get more reward. Your sabbatical will be sponsored. Your leave will be sponsored. Governments also behave that way. You understand? Because in the pet theory, you have to reward those who do meow like a cat to you and leave those who yell unrewarded. States also do that. And to return to that notion of polygamy, once you become polygamous, you self-destruct. You self-destruct. You understand? I've written essays on nations as polygamous because that's essentially what they are doing. You reward this person, you punish this person. You instigate the divorce of your fifth wife to reward your first one. You manufacture troubles. You have to manufacture troubles. Otherwise, say, my father produced 9 of us. He had
And that would take, really a lot of work in terms of the mechanisms that you have to put in place to ensure that there is this consensus building in terms of decision making, in terms of accountability, and all those issues. And clearly, the parties to such an agreement have to avoid rhetorical language that tends to demonize each side, because you can't work together at the same time publicly be actually attacking each other every day. It doesn't work. Now, to me, power sharing requires mutual accommodation. Now, what exactly should we expect to be doing? I think we require to develop a set of informal rules within those agreements that enable the day-to-day business of governing to take hold. It's one thing to say you're working together, but how are you going to work together? What kind of mechanisms are you going to put in place? And I think that the parties that are involved in that should address those issues in terms of the process of decision making, the process of accountability. All those issues need to be looked at. So in the first, also, of course, there has to be promotion of political stability. That is essential to the working of a coalition. Now, often, of course, the motives for joining a coalition are numerous. For the smaller parties, sometimes it's really the opportunity to access government, because without the coalition, they would never have had a chance to be in government. Now, when you look at the various coalitions, you'll find that the reasons for forming those coalitions, of course, have been very different. In the context of Kenya, for example, it was clearly to resolve a crisis. And the crisis there was in 2007 elections, as you know, was followed by massive violence in which 1,800 people died within weeks. So that was focused on peace promotion in terms of trying to solve that particular conflict. And I think that's also true of a number of other coalitions. So the reasons why parties come together are as diverse as the parties themselves, I think. We look at Zimbabwe, for example, I think was mentioned. Again, there, you really had a crisis that was an effort to solve. Now, the arrangements that I think we have to look at include, questions of accountability. That one of the challenges that emerges from coalition governments is the question of accountability in terms of how do you actually apportion accountability? How do you make sure that there's accountability? Because in the end, it also often results in a very complex situation when elections come up. And I think this was the experience in Kenya, for example, that you had Ojinga and Kibaki come into a coalition, and they ran this coalition for a while. But in the end, when then the elections came up, how do you apportion who to blame for what happened in terms of the government? And I think many people would agree that in that coalition, I think Ojinga probably lost more than anybody else, in terms of it becomes difficult to actually campaign against a government that you are in. And how do you apportion blame? How do you say this happened and we're not responsible for this? So, and I think those are critical issues that have to be understood as you go into this kind of process. And then I think the other question that I think I mentioned, the other point that I mentioned at the beginning, is this question of how do you actually legitimize this process with the general population. Because I think, as I pointed out at the beginning, like the experience here, it is an elite agreement. You know, it's the leadership that really has decided that they want to have this experience. And if you want to go forward, it means, of course, that you have to carry the people with you. They have to understand what is going on. And I think one of the experiences that I try to point out in the context of Kenya, they're often losers in the, in the question of coalition collaboration. So I think that the experience that we have seen in the context of, I think Zimbabwe also is another example of where actually Shangmirai, I think, lost out in the end, in the collaboration. He became associated with actually what the government was doing. It was difficult for him to come out and start to campaign that, in fact, they had different policies from the ones that had been executing as prime minister. Yeah. So those would be like my main observations that just to reiterate. One is that we have to understand that the constitution or any law does not implement itself. There's no way that a law can implement itself. It's the people that have to implement that. That means that we have to develop mechanisms which ensure that, in fact, this is happening. And that would mean also developing rules within the context of the administration that is emerging in terms of how are decisions going to be made. What is the process? How are policies going to be adopted? What kind of accountability mechanisms are you going to have? And I think those are very, very crucial points to attend to if a coalition system is to be effective. Because the problems that the country faces in terms of inequality and the need for economic development exist. And they have to be resolved in the context of that government. But then you are having a government of almost all parties in the process. And then the question comes up of accountability. And that means you can't use the normal approach in terms of the government is in power, therefore it's responsible. This time, everybody is in power. So how do you allocate accountability? How do you ensure that that is happening? So I think I will end there and look forward to the discussions that follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I will quickly react, and then we throw the conversation open. And members of the panel will now do their own roundup. Professor Hendricks finished our conversation by talking about the need for dialogue. And the last member of the panel also gave us a list, what he calls the implementations around power sharing, how we have to work within the parameters of laws. You and I will make the law to work, collaboration mechanism, and informal rules within agreement. Let me respond to just one of them. Power sharing is very, very difficult. If you look at all previous cases of power sharing, even among classical cases like Thomas Sankara and his friend who overthrew him in Mali, the fundamentals are based on the assumption that you all are going to love your nation. But that is not necessarily the fundamental of those who seek power. Where patriotism becomes connected to being a scoundrel. So, I am the president. You are in coalition with me, and I make you the Minister of National Planning. What does that mean? to be planning and do what? I used to have a friend who became a minister of education. He had all this proposal. We'll build many schools, we'll do this. Huh? The president said, I've accepted all your proposal, but I'm going to be the one to implement them. What, you know what that means? I'm going to be the one to talk to contractors who will build the school. You want a school? Okay, I'll build it. But it's going to be my contractor. So even that power sharing, you find the problematics. And I love anecdotes so much because that's organic training. Where I come from, they teach with stories. And I will tell you too. So when Jomo Kenyatta was in the process of becoming the president, he went from one village to another. What do you want? They said, the land they have taken away from us, we want the land back. This is a good point. He agreed with all of them. When he came to power, people began to say, but where is our land? He said, you know, when I came to your village, you gave me an advice. That was an advice. Now, as president, I have so many advice. It's an advice. All these good points we're making, these are just advice, right? And when they led the delegation again, he said, okay, but why can't I be the first to take land? Which he did. Nairobi, from the airport to Lukenga, he owns them, right? That is fulfilled. The second one, and I want you to be very honest, and as members of the audience, I'm going to ask the question. If you form your own church, you invested in forming the church, whom do you think God should reward first? I'm asking the members of the audience. Who should God, Almighty God, reward first? The one who formed the church. That is the one God, you all will pray and fast and pray and fast, but the person God will reward first is the pastor. My friend, you passed. Who is the second person that God will reward? No. What kind of God is that? The pastor's wife. That's the second person God will reward. It's not going to come to your turn easily. Who is the third? The pastor's children. You understand? Mm-hmm. After God has rewarded all of them and blessed them, it will now come to the followers. But you, as I'm looking at you, with all of us here, you're going to be number 1,000, which will be in 50 years' time. and I'm just using that analogy of how systems work. You understand? You and I cannot be in the same room, that we won't compete. I cannot be Father Gio, General Overseer, collecting your tithe and praying, and God has to bless me first. Because it's after God has blessed me that I will use myself as an example for you to become like me. Say amen. Amen. Very good. So let me know, please, somebody has to pass the mic around. Let's take a set of 5 questions. The panelists will answer. Please. You know the chair cannot run an errand. And you can direct your question to a specific member. Please, they will make notes. It's not going to be one-on-one, they will make notes.
Thank you, Prof. You know, my question will go to Dr. Stembi and also Prof. Nduli. They are just 2. Dr. Stembile, you spoke about, actually your presentation was eye-opening, that we've got Norway, coalitions are here to stay because of electoral system that we are having. So what is important is to come up with the management, a good management of this particular animal called coalition. But you said there's no way that we can come up with the stability of coalition. But I want to ask you a question. My name is Zweli, actually. I'm from the city of Tshwane. As I speak now, there's a motion against the current mayor, Silas Brink. And there've been attempts. And those particular motions, they cause a serious instability. Who suffers? It's not the elites who have come up with the coalition agreements. It's the masses on the ground, because service delivery will suffer. The question of voting for budget will suffer. Don't you see any particular way forward in terms of coming up with an act? COCTA has suggested an act now as we speak, the Amendment B, to say that at least there must be some ways of changing the current system from mayoral executive system to a collective system where a mayor and his executive don't have powers. And we must also come up with a threshold of parties that are involved in a coalition agreement. As we speak, the Speaker of the city of Tshwane is from a political party that has one seat, is a speaker for that particular matter. Where is democracy there? It's madness. So if we can't manage it correctly, coming up with the acts, that like in Lesotho, there was high level of instability until they deposited this thing into a constitution, the coalition agreement, that you can't just wake up overnight to decide to come up with a motion of no confidence over the president or the executive mayor. There must be some ways. You deposit it, it's not a gentleman's agreement like statement of intent. It must go and stand in a court of law. It must be a legal binding document. Because if people have managed to identify some particular tenders, they will say that tomorrow we are taking out this one, you'll benefit on the following. And that causes a high level of instability. That's one. Professor Nduli, you said a coalition agreement, it's an elite agreement. Now, in the country after the elections of May 29, we were told that this is a viable option that was given to us by the voters. That was a lie. As voters, we were given 3 ballot papers. There was no 4th ballot paper. The elites decided on our behalf that they are going to on coalition with a certain particular political party. For me to vote for party A, it means I reject party B. I don't want it based on their manifestos. But suddenly, my vote is going to be sold out to party B without me being informed as a voter. Is that not an insult to democracy? Is that not an insult to me as a voter who rejected party B? Suddenly, the elite decided to bring along the party B and betray me. Is that not an insult? Thank you.
Can I? Thank you very much, Program Director. My name is Johannes Mashawa. I'm one of the students at Timali. I also work for the National Department of Employment and Labor. I've not heard much about the role of the voters. Because my understanding is that the outcome of the election depends on how the voters performed. Now, to me, the most important question is, are these voters well informed on what is to be done? For example, in our situation, from time to time, you get huge figures of people who did not go and vote. What does that tell us? Ignorance, or what is it? If we can be clarified about it. Secondly, the outcome of the elections should also talk to the PR system. Now, for example, the ANC government got 40%. Did we allocate seats proportionally? And if the question is no, why did our leaders opt not to follow a proportional system? Because that is how the voters, wanted us to work together. And the last one is, you see, like we had 18 political parties. And each political party had their own manifesto. But I don't think in the country we do have such diverse needs. I believe that maybe a party or two political parties can address all our needs. We don't have to have these so many political parties. Why is it like that in South Africa in particular? Because if you look at other advanced economies, you find there are two major political parties contesting each other, unlike the situation that we see in South Africa. Thank you very much.
One, two, three. Good afternoon. Thank you to the panelists. I just have 3 quick questions. The first one, the presentations were quite insightful, and thank you so much. I can't overemphasize that. But I'm interested to hear just a direct response as to whether the GNU will work or not in South Africa. Will it work? And then to Dr. Mbete, I suspect you might have an answer to, is she still around? Oh, okay, in front, great.
I can't see you.
All right, this is Showers here.
Hi, Showers.
Good. I suspect the answer that you give to this, but I'm interested for the benefit of the audience, because I agree with you that the drafters of the Constitution foresaw and maybe intended power sharing. But my question is whether they anticipated a coalition because of the absence of the coalition formation arrangements in our framework. And then the third and last question, which dovetails with the question about voter apathy. I think it's something that is really worrying. If you combine the votes for the parties that form the GNU, together they constitute 30% of South Africa's voting population, plus minus. And of course, the first question is whether that in itself should be cause for worry. And obviously it challenged the notion of interpreting the intention of the voters. But what is the intention of South Africans? I think it brings that question. But then also, is there something to be said about apathy and and the proportional representation system. Because if you're in a country where there is so much in terms of the crisis of poverty, unemployment, inequality, maybe people are looking for fundamental change. And if you have a system that lends itself to power sharing, transactionalism, and compromises, maybe for a voter, that in itself is not what people are looking at in order to realize their objective of fundamental change. And then maybe you have higher voter apathy as a protest against that particular aspect of the system. So I just want to hear your reflections on that. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, can we maybe have one more? Could we just restrict ourselves maybe to one question, please, in case other people want to ask a question? Just one burning question, because we still have the panelists to respond to all these questions, and as you can see, it's almost 2 o'clock. So just one burning question, and then we'll let the panelists to respond.
Thank you. Burning to me is the fact that coalitions or governments of national unity, as the speakers said, are working in other countries, even in the Western countries. In South Africa, it shouldn't be shocking us. It was the first thing that happened to us in 1994, Government of National Unity. And in South Africa, I believe we should be the model for the world of how to do the Government of National Unity. Reason being, we already have the blueprint, which is the Constitution. Therefore, the aspirations of every party should be to ensure Chapter 2 of the Constitution is executed and is met for the citizens of the country. The elite, too, are citizens of the country. Therefore, it is important to me that the elite does not make decisions for the voters, because the voters concluded none of them has 51%. Then they must have a dialogue with the very same voters. Why is it that the elite works in parliament and in offices? They are working for the people on the ground. The people that voted for them were not in parliament. They were in spaces within their communities, communities where the very same elite come from. So I agree, especially with Prof. Hendricks, who talked about dialogue. I agree, especially with Prof. Forgot your name, I'm sorry.
Ndula.
You mentioned this also, that people have to interact. We can't, a country can't be governed by maybe 400 people who decide for them. We never outsourced our intelligence and thinking to the people in government. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think Bete can respond to all the questions.
All right, thank you so much, and I'm going to have to run soon, so thank you for the opportunity, and thank you so much for all of the questions. Just to the question from the gentleman from Tshwane, I don't envy you and the position that you are in. Look, I think one of the things that I agree with you, we do need management for coalitions, and I think coalitions can be stable. I didn't say that they can't be stable, they can be, but they require frameworks, proper agreements in order to do so. So the coalitions bill, I think, does provide an opportunity to create that at local level. I've heard a lot of criticism around the threshold. I'm kind of agnostic about the threshold. I've heard some people say that, you know, it limits people's democratic choice and other things, but I think that the kind of instability that we've seen caused by the 1- and 2-seat parties does indicate that we do need some kind of threshold. We're the only closed list PR system that has no electoral threshold. So in other countries, you need like 1% or sometimes 5-7% of the vote in order to get a seat even. We don't have that. So I do think that there's things that we need to think about around what is the basic framework that we need to put in, and linked to Showers' question, right? And our constitution is silent on that. Our constitution is also silent on political parties. It is astonishing to me that our constitution says that we're a multi-party system. It says that repeatedly throughout the constitution, and then sets no rules for political parties. So our political parties are in law private clubs. They operate on private law. Yet the people that we elect from political parties then need to be governed by the constitution. It's a serious gap that we have in our law. But having said that, some of these things cannot be fixed just with law. They need values, they need norms, they need customs to develop around them. And that takes time. I've been following very closely the Irish experience with coalition governments, and they've got a single transferable vote system that they've had since 1922, but they had their first coalition government in 1989. And now the culture of coalitions has become the norm. Voters want coalition government. So if a party competes to contest an election and says that we want to win the majority, they don't get voted for, because it's become what people are used to, what people like, what people expect. But that evolves over time. And unfortunately, we're in that messy process of evolution while we've got very big problems that we need to solve. And so I think that the law will take us so far, but there's places where the law can't take us. And that's then to the question on the role of voters. Voters, so two things. The first is that there was a lot of boycotting of this election. And because voters, I think Prof. Hendricks talked a lot about it, but voters don't trust the democracy, they don't trust parties. And so they just chose to stay out of it. And we're seeing that particularly amongst young people. In 2014, the proportion of the voters, the age group 20 to 29, or 18 to 29, 58% of them were registered to vote in 2014. That dropped to 49% in 2019. It dropped to 38% in 2024. So people are just checking out of the system. But those people that did participate, that did vote, voted for lots of different parties. That's the outcome. Now, voters voted for those lots of different parties because they wanted their party to win the most votes. But ultimately, because the choices of voters were fragmented, the outcome is fragmented. And there isn't a single party that commands the support of the majority of voters. And that's the conundrum that we're in. So the choices that voters are making are leading to the fragmentation. And that's because there's no single party that everybody wants to vote for. I'm sure if I asked here, is there one party, if I said, who would you vote for tomorrow if we voted again, we'd get different names. And that's what gets us here. In those countries that have two-party systems, it's because they have electoral systems that allow for that. Countries that don't have electoral systems that allow for that have multiple. You look at Israel, you look at the Netherlands, you look at Germany. There's lots of different parties. The UK is actually fragmenting. Their two-party system broke down in this last election. They're now a six-party system. And so these are all we're in a place of political fragmentation. That's our reality. So how do we manage that reality in a way that allows services to be provided, that keeps the society functioning? That's the reality we are in, is this one. So what do we do? What needs to be put in place for this reality to work for us? Because otherwise we're going to be like crazy people, you know, wishing for something else when this is what we've got. So what do we do with what we have? I'm ignoring your question about will the GNU work or not. Last I checked, I was a political scientist, not a sangoma, so I can't help you there. Thank you.
Cheryl, are you still there? Yeah, I think you can comment, and and then Prof. Ndulo will come after. Over to you. Cheryl?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, just very briefly, I'm enjoying this discussion, and it's good to see a number of people whom I know in the audience. Look, the first point I want to make is that actually voter apathy is global. You will see an increase in people coming out to vote when they can see a possibility for change. When they don't trust the system, they're not going to put that much effort into going out to vote. The second point I want to make is that these political parties anticipated these results. All the polls were telling them that these were going to be the results. They had a discussion at UWC way back in 2023 already on coalition governments and how they work, etc. So they would have been already thinking through their possible formations. We all thought that an announcement would be a coalition government. What we got was a GNU was pulled out of the hat. And this was good for the ANC because we are not focused on the ANC losing power. We almost see it re-legitimating itself, gaining more credibility. It becomes the peacemaker again, the one that's going to lead us to rescue our South Africa. In relation to the government of national unity and will it work? Showers, I'm going to restate, is what do we mean by it working? Do we mean political parties staying together for 5 years? Or do we mean that this government of national unity can actually deliver the kind of state that we want, with its outcomes being peace, development and prosperity and human dignity for all? I think this cannot be the job of just political parties. We will not reach that. It has to be broader than that. If we want the state to change, we all have to work collectively towards changing it. And that brings me to my third point, which is one that Prof. Lola was trying to highlight, that centralized power always generates a crisis. I think we're talking about the nature of our states in Africa. But I always wonder why we as political scientists seem to be stuck in this box. This is how the state functions. This is how we are represented through political parties, through elections, etc. We are not thinking beyond this. And I think we are shortchanging ourselves. I think that the emergence of phenomena like violent extremism, etc., is all telling us that we need to go and rethink our political systems. In South Africa, we also need to be doing this right now. We, as political scientists, have to take the lead in doing so. And so, Prof. Lola, we have to flip the question around. What is it that we want from our state? What form, what functions, what are the basic characteristics that we think will hold us together so that we can get what we wanted out of democracy: greater participation, greater participation in decision-making in particular here, decentralization of power, etc. Our question is, how are we going to transform, not reform, transform our states in order to get that?
Thank you. On the question of voter apathy, I think as Chair has pointed out, this is actually a worldwide phenomenon. And I think what it tells us is that people are getting disillusioned, you know, in the sense that they don't see any change, whether they vote or not vote. And I think that's what the issue is, that we have to create the conditions that actually encourage people to vote. Now, of course, some states have resorted to making voting compulsory. I mean, for example, Australia, I think that is actually an offense if you don't vote. So there are a number of countries like that. But I think that's not the solution. The solution is how do we make voters believe and also see that actually their vote makes a difference. And if governments function the same way, whether they vote or not vote, then of course the voter apathy continues. In the question raised in terms of proportional representation or the first past the post system, in terms of the coalitions, they're present even in you know, the first past the post system. I mean, Kenya had a coalition. It's not a proportional representation country. Zimbabwe is not proportional representation. Somalia had. So there are a number of countries that have done that. And because often it's a question of why they're coming together. So in the context of Kenya, it was clear. It was a question of you know, solving the crisis, you know, security crisis that had arisen. So they do happen. Now, also on proportional representation, it's not only one system. There are a lot of countries that have mixed the system. They both, some seats are proportional and some seats are not proportional. I think an example is like Mexico, for example, is one such example. So it's not like it's an either or. You can actually mix the systems. And it depends on the country in terms of whether actually that's what they want to do. Now, I think also the proliferation of parties has to do with the threshold. I mean, if your threshold is very, very low, then you're going to get lots and lots of parties, that some that just get marginal votes, they still get one seat and that sort of thing. So that's crucial, you know. But again, that's the national decision. What will be the threshold for getting a seat? And I think from what you were saying, I mean, I'm referring to my colleague over there, it looks like maybe it's time to look at that as well to see whether in fact it's too low. And of course you don't want something that is too high because of course it excludes a lot of people. But you can also see the danger when it's very low, that you end up with lots and lots of parties. And I think we have to accept that a coalition government is not easy, you know, and I think they are notoriously unstable. I mean, you have to look at Italy. I don't know how many times they have governments there. You know, it's like sometimes 3 governments change in a year. Because, as we were saying earlier on, you have to manage the process. And these are the parties that have been competing for power, and they're coming together to work together. So how are you going to make sure that, in fact, they don't continue the competition within the government? And it also translates into consequences when you have elections. And I think I tried to point out that in the context of Kenya, for example, many people believe that it did cost Odinga actually an election, in the sense that he was part of the government with the Kibaki, and then you come to elections 5 years later. Of course, how do you campaign against what was, you know, done under the government which he was part to? Because they reminded him that, well, you know, you're prime minister in this government, so what is it that you could do which you didn't do in that government? So I think those are issues which, of course, you have to address whenever you deal with these issues. And that's why in my presentation I was pointing out that you need to develop ways of making these decisions. Rules can produce, you know, crazy results, you know. I mean, laws are there, but there are also guardrails within political parties and all that prevent, you know, strange characters emerging. I mean, for example, in the context of the US, you can clearly see the Republican Party failing to control the emergence of Trump as leader. And I think that itself has presented them with a huge crisis in terms of governance and all those things. And that you couldn't legislate against Trump standing in the primaries, but the guardrails within the party, the norms that the party develops, should have been sufficient to prevent the emergence of a character like that. So thanks.
Well, this has been a very successful panel from national government to the government of a listening audience, coalition of audience. We are united here, and we are united as citizens and non-citizens with good and bad intentions, with lessons to go home with arguments to advance. It is not my job to thank you. I lack that juridical power. And I want to invite, who is doing the thank you? I want to invite, who is doing it? You. Oh, you already here? That's what I'm saying, because so, please, thank you so much for your brilliant suggestion. Thank you so much. The professor on the internet, we are grateful. And I thank myself. I thank myself as well.
Okay, colleagues, the second moment that we had been waiting for has come to an end. And with that, I would like to call Professor David Miller to give both closing remarks and a vote of thanks. Prof. Miller, please come.
Thank you very much, Prof. Lebakeng, for handling the proceedings in a very professional way. You know, the last man or the last woman standing always is given little time. And I'll try to do justice in terms of the little time that is allotted to me. But most importantly, when we started and we conceptualized this event, we thought it was going to be a very small event. And we initially booked a very small venue. And by Monday, when we went public to say this is what is happening in the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs, when the numbers started rising, then we realized that no, we have to do something quickly. We have to change from a smaller venue to a bigger venue. Now, at UNISA and in our school, we always pride ourselves of reclaiming Africa's intellectual futures. And I'm glad the chairperson of the panel, Professor Toyin Falula, has actually said that we have succeeded in terms of the initial objective that we have set ourselves. Now, in closing, one may be tempted to try and summarize, but I've been taking notes, and I listened carefully to Prof. Falula when he was saying that professors have got a tendency of torturing people. And I was asking myself, what is it that I have to do not to torture this very august audience? And I've decided that because of the inputs, the ideas that they have shared with us, they have now become public property by virtue of the fact that this is a public gathering, by virtue of the fact that we are also live streaming this event. And I decided that instead of giving a lengthy summary, what I'm going to do as an academic and a scholar, I'm going to write, I'm going to put what they have been saying in writing. And that is going to be in the form of an editorial note for a journal of public administration. And I shall make sure that that editorial note, that is going to encompass some of the ideas that have been shared in this event, are going to be shared amongst all of you. Now, let me start by thanking the VC. Our mother, she always doesn't disappoint when we're having events. She comes and grace our events. The panelists, these are distinguished African scholars. They actually traveled from the Americas to be here. So when we requested them to come as members of the international board for the school, and we also said, can you stay a few days longer so that we can benefit from the knowledge that you have? They have agreed. And for that reason, I wish to thank Professor Toyin Falula, Professor Mona, for having spared the time. I also wish to thank Prof. Cheryl Hendricks. She's more a part of us as she is associated with the school. Sitembile, she had to run, unfortunately, because of the time constraints. We promised that we'll finish at 1, but it was not possible. I also wish to thank her in absentia. We were also very, very lucky today that we had the principal as well as the vice principal, Professor Mutsa. As you heard in the morning, the principal had to go and pick up the vice. So they also had to make sure that they leave their very important schedules to come and be with us. I also, most importantly, like to thank the staff in the school. But among the school, the staff in the school, I want to single out the administration staff, administrative staff. Most of the time when we have these events, we thank those who are high level, and we forget about the admin people. Those people that we only sign, some of us we sign and then run around and they make sure that things happen. Thank you so much, colleagues. The people who are responsible for us trending on the platforms that we don't even know. Those people responsible for the sound there. Thank you very much for the work that you are doing. We really appreciate you. As the school, we also prepared something little to nibble. And the little something to nibble is on my right. I request that as we nibble, we go on a way less program. Because we wanted the caterers to up their game in terms of the volumes, and then they said, no, it's too late. So let's, like Ubuntu, Africans share the little that we have. Thank you so much. And most importantly, you, the audience, you are the people who make these events tick. Thank you. Food is served.